it's heinous and disgusting.
Nobody else ever had the courage to even think about it.
I think it's the weirdest rule in the handbook.
Okay, that's going to take quite a bit of editing.
You could just release it. I don't care.
David, you sent me this video. Where'd you find this video?
Yeah, so this popped up on my feed. There's a new channel called Unauthorized Polygamemes, and first hashtag is ex-Mormon, but it says the channel description is a channel dedicated to pointing out the absurdity of the current LDS polygamy narrative. And of course, this isn't new for those of you who may have seen videos on this before. For instance, Ward Radio hosted a debate between Jacob Hansen from Thoughtful Faith and Jacob Isbell, who's one of these polygamy deniers. They don't like that term, by the way, but I honestly don't know what else to call them. Anyways, there's a great debate on, and we can put the link in the description, where Jacob Hansen comes extremely well prepared and shows copious amounts of data to show that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, and Jacob Isbell comes and appeals to emotion and doesn't really have much. There's a few points which are ambiguous, but he lays down his case, and I think, to me, it's clear who won. But this is continuing, and normally this wouldn't rise to the level of, hey, let's make a video about it, except we have something special here with this Unauthorized Polygamemes channel, because they made a video for kids, and that's what gets to me. I've got kids myself, and this video is teaching this false doctrine to kids, which I think is disgusting. So I want to show it and talk about it. Also, they're breaking a law because they just took the church's cartoon about the polygamy cartoon, and they just took it and did their own voiceover. But we can watch it, and I really think that this is not acceptable. I think it's fine for adults to debate this all day long, but I don't think we should be making videos with this false doctrine for kids.
During Joseph Smith's time, there were many churches teaching different ideas about marriage, such as a man having more than one wife. When Joseph translated the Book of Mormon, he found that the Lord commands that marriage should only ever be between one man and one woman. Later, when Joseph Smith was translating the Bible, the Lord inspired him to clarify that the men in the Old Testament who had many wives had done something wrong. Many people accused Joseph Smith of having many wives, and this upset him very much. He promised to do all he could to teach the truth.
Can you just pause it there?
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a lot of truth woven. In fact, this is mostly truth. Like, people were accusing Joseph Smith of polygamy, and he promised to do all he could to tell the truth. And here's he, on the next scene, he's talking to Emma and so forth, and trying to figure this out. There's a lot of truth here, but anyway, we can keep going. It's
classic. So far, it's classic CES letter vibe, where it's like, we're going to tell you all of the truth that we want you to hear and none of the truth we don't want you to hear. Exactly. Instead of kind of doing, like, oh, wait, that brings up a question in my mind. Can you answer that question too? No. We got too much to talk about. Let's just keep moving forward.
Yeah, well, you said, well, it sounds like CES-letter. I actually get church video vibes because they got this nice piano music playing in the background of some primary song. And then they've got this lovely, calm female voice talking about it, like a motherly voice. And so they've really just copied the church video, put their own voiceover to it. Yeah. And this is copyright infringement here. There should be a cease and desist letter. If they want to make a video about it, great. Don't make it to kids, and don't copy the church's official video on this. So this is on the church's website. They've just put another voiceover, right?
We discovered this just not too long ago. So let's see if we can do this a side-by-side here.
This isn't a small video. I mean, they are a small channel. They just started, but there's 177 comments, and almost all the comments are like, this is brilliant. Thanks for fixing it. I love how perfectly the illustrations went. Fixing it meaning fixing the video. Hope you keep posting. This is the true story. Amen. It's so refreshing to know that Joseph was always faithful to the Lord. So the 177 comments and 3,000 views. And admittedly, it's a small channel, so 3,000 views isn't huge, but it's 3,000 views that hopefully weren't shown to kids.
2,000 views could be a lot, but okay. So I think that it's very shameful, the tactic. The idea in and of itself is pretty genius. Like, just take what the church produces and put falsehoods on top of it. It's like the perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. But let's go through just the first, what did we do, 30 seconds? I just want to hear the side-by-side.
Plural marriage, a commandment for a time. While the prophet Joseph was studying the Bible, he read about prophets like Abraham and Moses who had been married to more than one wife. Joseph had a lot of questions, so he decided to pray and ask the Lord. The Lord said that usually a man should have only one wife, but
Wow.
sometimes the Lord commanded a man to be married to more than one wife.
Okay.
This is wild because it's like almost the same voice. They've just
Yeah.
really copied it. Except I actually like the voice of the unauthorized Polygamy one better. I think they did a better,
Yeah.
a little bit less
Well-
condescending, sort of motherly tone there. A
Well,
little bit better music.
Yeah, the church's video definitely wants to present a tone that is not celebratory because this is a difficult topic. Like the church
Yeah.
has no qualms about saying this is a hard topic for everybody. It's not like we have everybody celebrating and then everybody condemning. It's like there's a lot of mixed emotion that goes around with it, which I can speak to later on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting how different the voices and the background music are and everything. Well, I want to play just a couple more seconds to get up to where we were on the other video.
Yep.
This was called plural marriage. The Lord told Joseph that his people should only be in plural marriages if he commands it.
Okay, so something.
By the way, can I just say something there? I don't want the chat and the comments and the viewers to get it wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk to our kids about plural marriage. We totally should. In fact, they should hear these kinds of things from us, these difficult gospel topics. What I'm saying is that the idea that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy doesn't have a leg to stand on. There are a couple of ambiguous statements here and there, but the point of the matter is that every credible historian, every trained historian, 100%, there is not a single name that's a historian that you can stay in the church, out of the church, in the RLDS Church, Community of Christ. Every credible historian has looked at the data ad nauseum and has agreed that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy. Everything points to that, and there's a whole lot more. I don't think this video is actually to give all the evidence of why he practiced polygamy, why we think that, and you can go watch other videos for that. But suffice it to say that every credible historian agrees. In fact, the RLDS Church, for a long time, back when Joseph Smith's son was the president and other presidents, they were pushing this narrative like 100 plus years ago. And then they've flipped now because it's just not supportable. And so the idea that we can believe that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and furthermore that we can teach that to our kids, is disgusting. And it's not disgusting because polygamy is necessarily a bad thing to talk about. It's disgusting because of the corollaries. The corollaries to this is all this other baggage that they usually don't say. They usually are the positive vibes, like, hey, Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy. He was faithful to his one wife. He was such a great person. But the part they don't really say is really what we're implying, and some of them do say, is Brigham Young was the one that instituted. He was a false prophet, and furthermore, 10 prophets thereafter kept up this practice. Well, obviously it wasn't led by God, because God would have stopped that a lot sooner. It might have gone through 1 or 2 prophets, but not 10 prophets. And so it's this whole idea that the church went astray. Joseph Smith was wonderful and perfect, and then the church went astray. And I think that is what's disgusting, because that's the kind of message that kids, they might not get from this video, but as they get this ingrained in their heads and they grow up and they start challenging church things, that's the thing that they're going to jump on. And that would be based on a false premise if they got it from this video, right? And that's why I think it's disgusting.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's where a lot of the conversation goes, is to kind of the evidence side of it. I personally don't take that stance is like, I'm going to follow the evidence wherever it goes. I have other ways of navigating this, but I think that is true, where it's like there's the evidence side of things, the emotional side of things, and this video doesn't really address the evidence. It just wants to toy with the emotions of an audience, and the cartoons make you think that they're trying to target children, which is very unsettling.
They are trying to target children. This is called, the title of the video is Plural Marriage Lesson for Children, Revised Edition. So this is literally supposed to be shown to your kids. And this is all ironic, because I feel like for most of my life, anti-Mormons have spent years, and beyond, prior to my life, have spent years and decades and even almost 200 years attacking Joseph Smith on this. Like, he was so bad because he's a polygamist. And I honestly don't think that really worked, right? It didn't really work. We've got a lot of great answers for these kinds of things. And now that hasn't really worked, and it's really, really old, and it's really tired, and it's been debunked ad nauseum. It still sounds shocking to some people that haven't heard it before or that don't know much about the church. But it mostly doesn't work. And there's really good reasons for it not working. But now that didn't work. So now we're going after Brigham Young. And I think that is just as bad, if not worse, because it's not it still leads to the conclusion that the church isn't the restored gospel. It doesn't have the authority and the keys anymore, and that's what's the problem.
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely not trying to beat around the bush about that. In my mind, they're not really making the case of the church needs to correct its history. It's the church is not true. There's false prophets. There's a lot of bad practices, evil stuff, corporate shenanigans, whatever. It's all bad. We need to leave and go do something else, go do our own thing, or go back to the basics or whatever it is. I mean, if I don't think about it, it's hilarious. But if I think about my kids coming across this video and how confusing it would be.
Yeah, it's similar. I think for me though, your kids are probably, maybe they ask more questions and think more about these things. I honestly think my kids, maybe they're a little younger than your kids, but not that young. I honestly think my kids wouldn't have a problem with watching this. They'll just watch it and eat it all up and be like, okay, so that's how it went down, and they'll go on with their lives. The problem is, it's the seed that's planted. If this is the narrative that's in your head, and then when you're a teenager and a later teenager and in your 20s, it's this kind of seed that, well, okay, I had a great upbringing because Joseph Smith's great and the Book of Mormon's great, but you know what? After that, it all went awry. So I think that's what this leads to. And for my kids, at least, they wouldn't come to that conclusion watching this video. They would just have the seed planted, and then presumably the seed would be planted from not just this video once, but from other influences through their lives, and then they would have a problem later on. So
that's crazy. I wonder if this channel plans on making a career out of this kind of twisting. I mean, I'm sure the church would come down on them pretty fast if they did it with all their videos. But you can imagine if they got away with it, right? If they got away with taking every single video and redubbing it for their own purposes, that would be so confusing for primary age kids. That'd be so devastating.
Yeah.
Well,
I think they would be wise to not do that, because the longer they don't do that, the longer they fly under the radar with just the one video. But even now, they should receive a cease and desist letter. But if they were to do this for every video, pretty quick it would bubble up to Church Office Building, and somebody would send a cease and desist letter. I think they're small enough now that no one's noticed.
Yeah, maybe.
We should watch the rest of the video, because we've talked a lot about it, but the viewers need to see it and so judge for themselves. Okay.
Years later, the Lord told Joseph and some other saints to be in plural marriages. It was not easy to live this commandment.
Wait, hold on a second. They've edited this.
Yeah, I think the scenes are not in the same order or something.
So you want to continue with this one?
Yeah, I think we should watch at least another, if not all, then some more of this.
Asked his wife Emma, who was president of the Relief Society, to help him teach the truth. Together, they did all they could to help people understand God's plan for marriage. Joseph also worked hard to teach the other leaders of the church this information. Unfortunately, some of them had already started believing and following these incorrect ideas in secret. Brigham Young, who became the next president of the church, was one of those who was deceived by this teaching.
Okay, so now we've got
there it is, the
Brigham
punch.
Young.
And so they've actually painted Brigham Young. Of course, they brought him up pretty early on in the narrative, but they've actually painted him as not a bad guy. He was just deceived by this teaching. But so it's not like they're saying Brigham Young is a terrible person. But once you have that seed planted and you think more about this, and you don't have the actual right historical information, then I'm sure that it will lead to Brigham Young being a false prophet.
Yeah, I mean, it has to. He was deceived for an hour Oh no, for a day. No, for a month. No. For years he was
For
deceived.
decades.
Yeah,
And
like
then the 9 prophets after him were deceived as well,
yeah.
right?
Like, what are you supposed to conclude? Like, oh, they were deceived for a few decades, but it was okay. They're on the right track now. No, I mean the implication's pretty clear. So do we
Yep.
do the church video now?
Yeah.
The government made laws against plural marriage. Some saints, including church leaders, were put in prison. In 1890, the Lord told Wilford Woodruff, the president of the church, that men should not marry more than one wife anymore. The leaders of the church shared this commandment with the saints. This is still the Lord's commandment today. A man should be married to only one wife.
Can you just pause there?
So there's no Brigham Young.
That's not the Lord's commandment today. The Lord's commandment today is monogamy is the norm, but sometimes polygamy is commanded. That's the Lord's commandment today, and it's always been that way. It's just a lie to say that.
Yeah, that's yeah. So we should come back to that a little bit more because I have opinions about that. So there was no mention of Brigham Young, and the video looks like it's wrapping up here. But this is the first time I'm watching them side by side, and one of the things that I am thinking is that neither one of these cartoons do it justice, right? Like these are both.
I'm not saying the church one is good, but
yeah, well,
it's my first time watching the church one today too.
The church one is good, but it's only good because it's presenting a very complicated issue in a very simple way to kind of introduce this idea to kids for the first time, and therefore it's doing a reasonable job. But I don't think a complicated issue like this should ever be put into a 60-second time or soundbite. Like it's very, very hard to present this idea in anything less than an hour because it just takes so much time to just think about what's going on. So the church did a great job, and these other people did a great job pirating it. But both of the
I push back a little bit on that because I do feel like no kid's going to sit down for an hour. So that's sort of the corollary of what you're saying as well. But I think a 60-second chunk is fine, and so they've got the idea as long as it's actually correct and it's something that is supported by the historical record, and then another 60-second chunk later, and then a 5-minute chunk while they're in Young Women's when they're 12, and then a 16-minute chunk later on in a dramatic recreation or whatever. Like these things are going to be peppered throughout their lives, and that's fine. So I actually don't mind too much. Plus, I think we think that kids that they may not get enough from 60 seconds, therefore they may worry, but I think most kids will get a 60-second and just be like great, and then move on with their lives and go play with their Legos. Like it's probably not a big deal, but it is a big deal if you preach false doctrine in 60 seconds. That is not okay to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, do we continue?
Sure.
He taught it to his wife Mary. Not knowing about Brigham Young, Joseph Smith continued to work to remove these teachings from the church. When he found someone who was said to have many wives, he held a court, and if they were found guilty, he removed those people from the church. Sadly,
just pause
Joseph
there?
Smith was...
And then it's going to say Joseph Smith was killed before he could completely wipe out this practice, and then it kept going, and then the private practice went in public. But the problem is almost every statement here is almost true. It's either completely true or almost true. But like Joseph Smith did condemn spiritual wifery, and he didn't. What is spiritual wifery? That sounds like polygamy. No, that specific term means something that was popularized by John C. Bennett. It means having sex with a woman in order to elevate your moral status, in order to somehow become enlightened. That's spiritual, and that's not a wife. Sorry, it says spiritual wifery, but it means having sex with either somebody else's wife or someone who's not your wife for some kind of spiritual gain. That's what spiritual wifery is. And so, yes, Joseph Smith strongly condemned spiritual wifery. He did hold councils. He did have people in front of him. He did hit that gavel. I don't know if he had a gavel, but he did kick people out of the church for it, and understandably so, because it's not anything that is attested in any scripture ever. It's just somebody wanting to get with girls, right? Yeah. But and Joseph Smith, the confusing thing though is that Joseph Smith said he didn't practice polygamy. There's one particularly, I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's one particularly prevalent quote here where he's saying he didn't practice polygamy, but his wording is really weird. It's like he's trying to dance around the topic without actually saying he didn't do it. And honestly, I'm of the opinion he just lied. He was told to do this, he did it, but he didn't like doing it, and he kept it secret. And it was a good thing he kept it secret, because worse things might have happened than the bad stuff that already happened. And so anyway, but my point is, like, there is a quote where Joseph Smith says he didn't practice polygamy, but the words were chosen very carefully, and so he's not really lying. But even if he was really lying, well, so what? Abraham lied about a wife topic as well in the Old Testament, and I actually think it's much more easy to believe that Joseph Smith simply lied to protect his people, and that God actually may have allowed that lie, than that, like, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people were all in cahoots. There was Brigham Young, John Taylor, there was like Eliza R. Snow, pretty much everyone that attested that polygamy happened, both during Joseph Smith's time, because there are journal entries, there's a few of them, and then a ton of them after Joseph Smith's death. All these people had to be in cahoots, which is simply not true, because a lot of them didn't like each other. And so a lot of them wouldn't have had any reason to be in cahoots with Brigham Young. They wouldn't have been scared of Brigham Young. They wouldn't have even... They didn't have any reason to lie. And so there's just an overwhelming evidence that he did practice polygamy, and very little evidence that he didn't. So anyway, that was a long rant, but that's mostly the end of the video. You can watch the rest if you like, though.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap these up.
Killed before he could completely remove this teaching from the church. After his death, those who had many wives in secret began to do it in public. It became a tradition, and the saints eventually forgot that Joseph had taught against it. Thankfully, in 1890, the Lord told President Wilford Woodruff that this practice was hurting the church and they needed to stop doing it.
That's not what the Lord told him. That's a lie.
It was helping the church, and then it was hurting the church, and that's why we do things differently. We find out that something's going to hurt the church, and so we stop.
Well, it may have been hurting the church. I'm not saying it did or it didn't. I'm saying the Lord didn't say this is hurting the church, so you need to stop it.
Yeah.
That's not how. That's not the recorded record of the revelation that we got to stop it, right?
Well, and also the idea that Joseph could have fixed it if he didn't die. It's such an insult to God to say, "Oh, you had a good plan, and it would have worked, except your prophet died and everything got screwed up. Sorry, God."
Yeah, you came this close, and you couldn't fix it somehow in the later decades. Even if they weren't true prophets, you couldn't, like, kill them or wipe them off the earth or something. No, you couldn't do that.
And do you know, what is the conclusion that they come to on, okay, so Joseph couldn't fix it, the church went apostate, went off the rails, and therefore the resolution is to do what? What is the fix?
Yes, there are breakaways of the church. They're pretty small, but for the most part, it's just people that are starting to eat this up. I haven't really met people. I haven't met anyone in California who I haven't really talked to a lot of people about this exact topic, but I hear that there's sort of a small but growing influence in the church in Utah. But in Utah, it's fine to just culturally keep being a member and culturally come, because you live like next door to all these neighbors that go to the church, and your kids are friends with their friends, and so you just show up. And I'm pretty sure that's what a lot of these people may be doing, is they're just still culturally in the church, but they may or may not, they may have more of what they would call maybe a nuanced view of the church or something. I don't know. Maybe we should get one of them on here and let them speak for themselves at how they're grappling with this. I imagine there's a spectrum of how to grapple with this. And
if anybody wants to come on, feel free to email me, email in the description, whatever. I would be interested in talking to somebody, but I don't think I'm interested enough to like watch all their videos and try and piece together their theories and theologies, because it seems like what you'd have to do is say, oh, we're going to start a new church, fine, or we're going to fix this church, we're going to set everybody on the right path again, okay, fine. But where does the theology pick up? Like, where we just pick up where Joseph Smith died, like just rewind the tape and pretend like none of the polygamy happened, and then just be like, okay, we're going to start here, ready, set, go. Like, I don't understand how that would work. Like, how do you answer questions about authority and then temples, endowment? Like, Joseph Smith was involved in all that stuff. How do you just pick all that up? Like, what does the Doctrine and Covenants look like?
That is a glaring omission here, right? In terms of they're destroying faith without providing any kind of alternative. I actually am, I wouldn't say happy, but I'm much happier when somebody leaves our church and goes and is a Presbyterian or a Catholic or whatever. I think that's a much better way than leaving the church and becoming an atheist. But because they have something to replace it with, and they still have the faith, and particularly faith in Christ. But when somebody gives you, like, destroys your faith and doesn't have anything to kind of follow that up with, that's hurtful. And I think a lot of these, like, apparently there's a billboard. This is not the only channel that posts about this. There's another small channel called Karen Hyatt, and I just watched her, I think it's the latest video or 2 videos ago recently, where she was saying, hey guys, we got that billboard on the side of the freeway in Salt Lake. Apparently there's a big billboard about Joseph Smith had one wife, and we got that. Congratulations. We're glad we raised the funds for that. And now it's going to be there for everyone to see as they're driving past, and there's a QR code on it, and there's a website so they can. And here's my car. Here's a picture of my car, by the way, because I got a poster on there that has the QR code, and I was just driving the other day, and someone stopped at a red light. They took a picture of the QR code, and while they were waiting for the red light, they're like looking, and I feel so good about this. And why don't you guys join me? Really join me in this, because it's really fun. Like, just print out a poster, stick it on your car. There's a file here, and so I really think that this is something that, for whatever reason, people feel like they need this narrative. Maybe they honestly love the church and love the Book of Mormon and love Joseph Smith so much that they've walked themselves into this kind of belief. Maybe they have had some kind of feeling, and that's what they're going after. I'm not sure. We should really get one of them on there. But I also am interested in, what does that lead to? Because there's a whole spectrum. There's, on one end of the spectrum, there's the extreme conspiracy theorists that said that Brigham Young conspired to kill Joseph Smith, and John Taylor was the one with the pistol that shot Hiram and Joseph through the head and whatever, or Hiram through here. It came out his nose, and that was a hostage situation, and it just doesn't line up, right? It doesn't line up to the fact that Joseph Smith died outside the jail. The whole mob was there, and they lined him up and shot him. And there's a court case on this with many people testifying, and they couldn't have all been in cahoots. In fact, there's many of them that would have said the opposite if Joseph actually did die up there. And so, anyway, just all these things. So that's one end of the scale. And then I think the other end of the scale is just, let's just be a cultural Mormon, because, this is still good in the church. So I really think probably people fall on somewhere along the spectrum, just depending on how they feel about things.
It's interesting. All right, do we finish it?
Yeah, sounds good.
The church shared this commandment with the saints. What Joseph had originally taught is still the Lord's commandment today. A man should be married to only one wife.
Yeah, thanks. Good job.
That's amazing title there. How the title just zooms up. I just mind blown. Incredible skill with the editing.
So touching. Very sad to see some of the peoples that like to target the young audiences, but I have an episode that I want to do on brainwashing and what that looks like for people in and out. When you use the term, what do you mean, and who's actually doing it, or who is accused of doing it? So it'd be interesting to get your opinion on my thoughts on this topic, because I don't think my thoughts come from like the typical spaces that you see online. Should we do that, or do you have more that you want to say on the topic?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so the way I approach polygamy comes from the way that I was taught polygamy. And I was taught polygamy in a way that it's probably a little bit different than what most people get exposed to growing up. So the first thing that happened was I was very young when I was taught that my grandma was actually my step grandma, because my grandma, my dad's mom, had passed away before I was born. So the grandma that I grew up with was my step grandma, and I was very aware of my grandma, who I never met, because we went to her graveside all the time on Mother's Day and stuff, and we talked about her and asked my dad questions, and there was pictures of her, and my great grandparents were still alive, and that was their daughter. So I would go over and visit my great grandparents, and I would see pictures of my grandma that I never met, And so I'd ask them about it. We'd talk about it. And I knew that my grandpa was married to the two women and sealed to the two women, and I was sealed to the two women, to the two grandmas. And so I knew that growing up. I have two grandmas and one grandpa. So for me, that was very normal. And in my mind, it was that. It was grandpa, because we would joke about it. Like at family reunions and stuff, we would joke about how when everybody dies, my two grandmas are going to gang up on grandpa, because he's always like picking on grandma or whatever. So we would always joke about how those two women will be together someday and that grandpa will be married to both of them. And so in my mind, this was like perfectly normal. Then another thing happened. On the other side of the family, on my mom's side of the family, polygamy was a very common topic because I have great-great-grandparents who were polygamists, and we would go to family reunions every other year, and we'd go to the family ranch, the polygamous family ranch for the reunions. And there was polygamy stuff all over the place. Like there was the family charts, and we'd constantly talk about like, well, which wife are they from, and who's the cousins over here. And the ranch house and stuff was set up like a polygamous setup. Like there was different bedrooms, and some of them were kind of oddly situated. And then there was a cave up in the hill that we called Polygamous Cave, because that was the cave where Grandpa would go hide out when the sheriff came to arrest him for being an outlaw polygamist.
Uh-huh.
And so we'd go on these hikes. Every reunion, we'd be like, hey, let's go up to Plig Cave. What's Plig Cave? What's the cave that our polygamous grandfather would go hide in from the sheriff? And there's this whole story that went along with it and stuff. And so I knew that my mom's family was involved in polygamy. We had pictures and lots of family history there. And so that was very normal. Like I grew up with that. And so then I never really thought that polygamy was weird. And then when the polygamy truthers, polygamy deniers, whatever the heck they're called, when they started coming around, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And they started debating on all the evidence. The evidence in my mind never made sense. It never made a difference. Like if they had really good evidence, I don't know that I would have been touched by it at all. Because there's a question that comes up in all this that most people don't realize. For me, it's powerful. Maybe for everybody else, it doesn't mean anything. The question is, if you believe that families are eternal, how do you deal with the question of a husband who remarries after his wife passes away? It's a big question. This happens all the time. Lots of people have a second spouse after their first spouse dies. And very, very few religions deal with this question. Very few. Which is unfortunate because it's a huge part of life. Most of the people who, preachers, pastors, religions that deal with this question, what they do is they say there are no families after this life, which is an insult to God as far as I'm concerned. It's a horrible way to say, I don't know how to answer that question. And that's effectively what they're saying. There's no families after life because it's too hard to answer all of the different combinations of questions that you get when you start answering families after this life. And there's a cop-out answer in the scriptures about there's no marriage and divorce in the Lord, and that's not what the scripture means. It's a bad interpretation, blah, blah, blah. But if you're trying to answer the question of polygamy, I tend to start with, you have to answer the question of eternal families. And that's what I think the polygamy deniers miss. If you say there was never any polygamy, God doesn't want us doing that, then figure out the answer to the second wife question. If you can figure that out, you might have me.
That's fair enough. And are you also... I'm not troubled by this. Are you also troubled by the idea of sealing the kids and how that all works out? Because there's complicated kid situations. It's not always mom, dad, and like 3 kids. There's sometimes kids from other families and so forth. Or is it mostly just the man-woman marriage situation, or man or multiple women or multiple men?
No, none of it troubles me. So that question got answered for me through my wife's family. My wife's family is a his, mine, and ours, and lots of ceilings in different directions. And so after watching and dealing with that a little bit, I added on to my testimony a testimony of the eternal families and how we're not segregated by family, we're joined by family. We're not trying to compartmentalize the relationships. We're trying to unify the relationships. We are one in Christ. We are the body of Christ. And so the idea that for example, I could go visit my grandma in the next life, or I could go visit my grandma in the next life, and both of them would be my grandma. That doesn't bother me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't bother me that I might go and visit one of my kids, and I might go and visit that same kid the next day, and they might be referring to a different mom. Maybe they have two moms because of some divorce ceiling thing that was going on. I don't know. But the fact that they have two moms and only one of them is one that I know or whatever, it doesn't bother me. In the same way that in this life it wouldn't bother me. Like for example, I call my in-laws mom and dad. I answer the phone like, "Hey mom, hey dad." That doesn't bother my parents because I have another dad and another mom. They understand our relationship, and I understand my relationship with the other. And so in that way, my testimony, if you want to dumb it down to how people would normally say it, is that God has a way of figuring all this stuff out. I don't need to worry about it because my love is not going to be shattered just because somebody was involved in a sealing ceremony. Just because somebody doesn't believe, I'm not going to be able to see my favorite person because, they ended up in the wrong kingdom. No, it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a place where love thrives and God helps us figure out these relationships. And so going back to what I was saying about people who try to put a wedge into doctrine, those are the questions you need to figure out. Not all this evidence BS like, oh, Joseph Smith never, always, Brigham Young, whatever, blah, 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 blah. No, forget all of that and just look at the doctrine. Give me a solution for the doctrine, and then you'll have my attention.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that's exactly right. I do think that the church proper, not these breakaways or whatever, has the best solution to that. And the best solution to that is actually an incomplete solution because we don't know everything. But we do have pieces of the solution. And one piece of the solution is, well, polygamy actually is practiced on earth. So maybe it's not that unusual that there may be, that a man, a wife can pass away. Another solution is God generally, we can rely upon God to solve this problem in the future because he created this situation. He put us here in this mortality with this complicated cycle of birth and death and complicated cycle of when people come and leave. And yet he told us to be one with each other. So he created this dichotomy or these two coincident things, right? And so don't you think that God has a way to solve this? And then another piece of the puzzle is the millennium. I think if you take the Christian interpretation of we just die and we go to heaven or hell, then there's no solution. But if there's a space between now and the judgment, and particularly if that's a really long space, like, I don't know, let's throw out a number, like 1,000 years, I don't know, let's just come up with a number. Maybe there's a long space where we could figure this stuff out. And I truly believe that millennium will be a lot of figuring out family situations, a lot of dating and marriage, because if you think of the pie chart of all the 100 billion people or so that have ever lived on this planet, and then you think of the tiny, tiny, tiny sliver that have been sealed, then and there's all these other people that would have if they had had the chance, right? And so generally when God does not give you the chance to do something or does not give you the chance to solve something or fix something, the same when you've got two wives because one died and now you married another one, generally there's a space in the future to solve that, so we don't have to worry so much.
Yeah, and that's why Joseph Smith and Brigham Young got into this problem, if you want to call it that, is because they were prophets and they were trying to figure out this problem of eternal families that's been plaguing humanity for centuries at this point. They were trying to figure it out, and they had the courage to come up with the solution or receive the revelation, the doctrine of the solution, and now they get trampled for it when nobody else ever had the courage to even think about it, even today. Go to your pastor, go to your preachers, you Christians, and ask them, if my wife dies and I get married a second time, which wife will I be with? And they'll quote that stupid scripture that everybody misinterprets, and you'll be so confused and lost. You'll be like, oh, well, I guess we'll just figure it out later. Nobody's got the courage. It's so dumb to think that God loves us so much that he doesn't want us to be families after we die. It's ridiculous.
But the official answer is that scripture that there's no marriage in heaven and so forth, which isn't misinterpreted. But I have personally spoken with other Christians and also watched videos of Christians online who basically said in not so many words that I don't really believe that. Like I still think I have a special relationship with my wife.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna die, I'm gonna pass along, and yeah, we're not married anymore, but it'll still be special. So I'm like, so it's like a marriage. Like maybe you're like married and you don't want to sort of separate and just sort of float around on different sides of heaven. And they're like, yeah, it's kind of like a marriage, but it won't be an official marriage, right? Like, no, you got to pick a lane. You can't have both ways. Either you're married or you're not married, right? And if God is the one that sanctions your marriage in life, maybe he's the one that's going to let you keep it in the next life.
Yeah, it's really tough for people that don't have prophets. Like it's just a really hard thing. You did ask me though, does a certain thing bother me? There is one thing that I've always wondered about. I don't know if it bothers me because I don't think about it that much, but I do wonder why it is that a man could be sealed to two women, but a woman cannot be sealed to two men. And that's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing. And I have some
Can
theories.
I clarify? That's not exactly right. So it's true that I will clarify and to say in this life. So in other words, a man can be married to two or more women, and a woman cannot be married to more than one man in this life. Like if a woman has had a second marriage that's just civil marriage, and then they both pass away, then they could be sealed in the temple, and therefore this woman has two husbands. So there is a difference there. But there's also other differences that run the other way. And this is a whole long discussion, and I haven't quite figured this out, but I've got a few puzzle pieces, and we could jump into this. But let me try to give the short version, and maybe we'll do another video on this once I've written down my thoughts. But there's several other weird things that go along with this, and I think the combination of these weird things is pointing to something special. So there's a really weird thing in the handbook. I think it's the weirdest rule in the handbook, and it is that if a woman is sealed to a husband, right? Let's call the woman Ellis and the husband Bob, right? Alice and Bob. They're sealed together, and then all the kids are born in the covenant. Okay, so far so good. We all get this. Now, what happens in one of the following 3 or 4 scenarios? Ellis is unfaithful and has kids with Charlie, or Ellis is R-worded. For the algorithm, I'm going to censor that, with somebody in a dark alley and has a kid. Or let's say Bob dies, and now David comes along, and Ellis has kids with David, but they're not sealed, right? Or there's other scenarios. If any situation, either she's unfaithful, she's not, whether Bob was there or not, this is all irrelevant. In all of the scenarios I listed, in every imaginable scenario, her kids are born in the covenant, including if she's R-worded from somebody, including if she's unfaithful. But what happens to the man? What happens to Bob? If Bob is unfaithful and goes off and sleeps with somebody, that kid is not born in the covenant. If Alice dies and Bob gets remarried civilly, that kid is not born in the covenant. It's only if the Bob is resealed to a new woman that kid would be born in the covenant. Yeah. So it's almost as if the sealing to the kids, which is what born in the covenant is, right? The sealing to the kids goes through the mother, and it's something special about the mother. From the moment that this woman, Alice, is sealed to anybody on the planet for the rest of her life, even if she's left the church. And the only thing that can stop this, her future kids, any future kids that she has for the rest of her life being born in the covenant or being sealed to her, is if she cancels the sealing. That's the only thing. So, whereas for Bob, it's not the same. For Bob, he can do whatever, and his kids are not going to be born in the covenant. So there's something special here and it relates to marriage because, like I said, if Bob gets remarried, his kids are not born in the covenant until he's sealed with the new wife, the new woman, whereas that's not true for Alice. So there's something special going on, and it's almost a little bit like the inverse of this And I have some theories about how these two puzzle pieces fit together, but
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a whole hour if we get into it. So maybe
Yeah.
we should like do another one on that. But I just
Yeah,
want
I've
people
got-
whoever's still watching after like an hour, to think about that a little bit and try to figure out how that works and how that fits in with this whole question.
So there's more technicalities to that if you go and talk to your sealers in your temples. So those who have temple recommends, or I guess if you don't, if you know a sealer or whatever, you can ask them. And there's a lot of unique situations that come up, and they have answers to all of the ones that I've ever seen, where it's like different kids, different husband, spouse. We don't know what's going on. Some are alive, some have passed away, like all kinds of different situations like that. And it's pretty interesting to see how they solve some of the different situations in a sealing room. And like who needs to come to the altar and what do they need to do to try and figure this out. It's pretty fascinating. But yeah, I've heard that example. It's been years, but that example that you described, I've heard it before, and the way it was presented to me was basically no one ever questions who the child's mother is. You can question who the child's father is, but you can't question who the child's mother is. And therefore, the sealing to the mother is always going to be held true as long as the mother is having children. They're always going to be sealed as long as they're born to a mother who's under the covenant.
Yeah, I don't maybe want to die on this hill, but having said that, don't we know what we know in the next world? And you might say, well, yeah, but what about in this world? If some kid thinks that he or she is born in the covenant, but they're actually not, and then they die, and then now they're not sealed to their parent. Well, there's a lot of situations that are incorrectly recorded or wrong, or something's wrong, and there's a lot of things to figure out in the next life. This is just another one. In fact, it's a very, very minor one. So I'm pretty sure in the next life that could be figured out. I don't know. I've got a lot more thoughts on this, but we can leave it for another time. Yeah, I'm just going to round it up by going back to the first topic, which is the video. For anyone that's still watching, for the two people that are still watching by this point, hi, Mom. So I do want to say that I really think there's a problem with teaching something false. And I think there's a special problem with teaching something false that needs repentance, that needs you to stop. Because it says, for instance, in Matthew, like, whosoever shall break one of the least of these commandments, this is in, I don't know, I've got it written down here, but I didn't get where it's from. But whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. So, if you just take out the teach men so, then it would read, whosoever shall break one of the least of these commandments, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And that doesn't make sense, because if you're going to break the least commandment, if you're going to have a sip of like Coke or I don't know, whatever it is, if you break the least of the commandments, you are not called least in the kingdom of heaven. It's only when you add in that second statement that Jesus said, and shall teach men so. So now it makes it really strong, because it's saying, okay, you're breaking a little commandment, yeah, whatever. But if you are teaching somebody to break the commandments, or if you're teaching false doctrine, then fire and damnation, like, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. I think that's what the verse is getting at there. Is Jesus is telling us, okay, maybe you'll break some commandments, whatever, but don't you teach people to do that. That's what's wrong, right? And that's what he had the problem with the Pharisees and the whited sepulchres full of bones and outwardly like. This is the problem that Jesus had with the scribes and the Pharisees and the people that were teaching, because they were teaching the wrong thing. So I don't think that this is just a small matter. I think it's teaching the kids who are otherwise defenseless, and I think it's heinous and disgusting. So, and if you want to hear my real thoughts, maybe I'll give those to you as well. No, I'm kidding.
Very good. Well, teach your kids in the way that you see fit, as guided by the Spirit. Make sure that you are teaching and not assuming that someone else is going to do the job for you, and be an actively engaged parent, etc., etc. All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya. Okay. That's going to take quite a bit of editing.
You could just release it. I don't care.